Welcome to the Octagon Edge, where you find every update on the UFC and MMA world. What if I told you that one of the UFC's biggest stars is so terrified of getting sick before his title fight that he's basically locked himself away from civilization like some kind of paranoid dictator? And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the absolute madness happening behind the scenes in mixed martial arts right now. From fighters throwing hand sanitizer bottles at each other in hotel lobbies, to champions making comeback decisions that have medical experts questioning their sanity, the MMA world has completely lost its collective mind. We're about to dive into controversies so wild that even the most dramatic soap opera writers would say it's too unrealistic. The drama surrounding Khamzat preparation for his upcoming title fight has reached levels of paranoia that would make Howard Hughes jealous. This guy has literally transformed into a hermit, refusing to leave his house because he's convinced that one single interaction with an overzealous fan could catastrophically ruin his shot at UFC gold. Think about how absolutely insane that actually is for a moment. We're talking about a professional fighter who bulldozes through elite opponents like they're amateur wrestlers at a high school tournament, yet he's genuinely terrified of catching a common cold from some 12-year-old kid asking for an autograph outside a grocery store. Chimaev revealed in a recent interview that he's completely banned his entire training team from going to shopping malls, restaurants, or literally anywhere that involves public interaction. Because, and I quote, "If somebody gets sick and he's a big fan, he's gonna come from me. And maybe we get that sickness, you know?" The level of environmental control this man is exercising over every aspect of his life would make the most extreme germaphobes look casual by comparison. He's essentially created an isolation bubble around himself that's more secure and controlled than most celebrity compounds or government safe houses.
But here's where the story takes a completely contradictory turn that exposes just how chaotic this whole situation really is. Just yesterday, footage surfaced on social media of Chimaev randomly running into Anderson Silva at what appeared to be a public location, completely contradicting his own carefully constructed isolation strategy. The irony of a man who claims he won't risk exposure to fans casually bumping into one of the most recognizable faces in MMA history wasn't lost on anybody paying attention. Either his paranoia has convenient exceptions, or his team's security protocols have some serious gaps that could derail everything they've been working toward.
Meanwhile, Dricus du Plessis and his coaching staff just dropped an absolute bombshell announcement that has the entire MMA community questioning everything they thought they knew about this upcoming championship matchup. His head coach boldly declared in a recent interview that their game plan involves out-wrestling Khamzat, the guy who's built his entire professional reputation on being an unstoppable wrestling machine that turns elite fighters into helpless victims on the ground. This isn't just supreme confidence talking. This is either borderline delusion or pure strategic genius, depending on how you choose to interpret it. The audacity of this wrestling-focused strategy becomes even more shocking when you consider the source and the stakes involved. Either du Plessis and his team have discovered some revolutionary wrestling techniques that nobody else in the sport knows about, or they've completely lost touch with the reality of what they're about to face inside that octagon. The idea of out-wrestling someone who's made a career of ragdolling opponents with wrestling credentials that most fighters can only dream of achieving seems like tactical suicide wrapped in confident packaging. But the Chimaev versus du Plessis situation is absolutely nothing compared to the straight-up circus that Paddy Pimblett has single-handedly created with his latest social media call-out of featherweight champion Ilia Topuria. This beef goes way deeper than most casual fans realize, and it actually started with one of the most ridiculous and embarrassing incidents in recent UFC history that somehow involved grown men fighting over Twitter comments, like teenagers arguing about who gets to sit at the cool kids' table during lunch. Picture this absolutely absurd scene for a moment. Two professional fighters in a hotel hallway, tensions rising over social media drama, and suddenly Pimblett is hurling hand sanitizer bottles like he's competing in some twisted Olympic event. The whole confrontation escalated so quickly from verbal sparring to actual physical violence that hotel security personnel had to physically separate two grown men who make their living beating people up for entertainment. The visual of elite athletes throwing toiletries at each other while screaming about Instagram posts is comedy gold that writes itself.
The backstory that led to this sanitizer bottle showdown makes the entire situation even more bizarre and petty than it initially appeared. Pimblett originally made some inflammatory comments about Georgian fighters on social media that triggered Topuria on a deeply personal level. And instead of letting it slide like most professional athletes would, both fighters decided to turn their keyboard warrior beef into a real-life confrontation that could have ended careers. Now Pimblett is sitting pretty at rank 9 in the featherweight division, openly admitting in interviews that other fighters probably deserve a title shot more than him based on rankings and recent performances, but still demanding to fight the champion because he believes popularity should trump merit.
What makes this entire controversy even more hypocritical and entertaining is Pimblett's recent savage attack on Arman Tsarukyan, where he called the highly ranked contender completely irrelevant and accused him of being a spoiled rich boy trying to pay his way into high-profile fights. The irony here is so thick you could practically cut it with a knife, considering Pimblett is literally attempting to skip the entire ranking system based purely on his social media following and entertainment value rather than actual fighting accomplishments. He's essentially becoming the exact thing he's criticizing other fighters for, but with a thick Liverpool accent and apparently zero self-awareness about the contradiction.
Speaking of questionable decision-making that has everyone in the MMA world split right down the middle, Charles Oliveira's shocking announcement about accepting a fight against Rafael Fiziev has medical experts, fellow fighters, and fans seriously concerned about the long-term effects on his brain and overall health. This man got absolutely brutally knocked unconscious by Ilia Topuria just 2 months ago in a fight that ended with him face down on the canvas, and now he's rushing back into the octagon like nothing significant happened to his neurological system.
The ridiculously quick turnaround time between getting knocked out cold and accepting another fight has legitimate medical professionals questioning whether the UFC has any real responsibility in protecting fighters from making decisions that could permanently damage their long-term health. Oliveira admitted in multiple interviews that he personally requested this fight from Hunter Campbell and the UFC brass, essentially forcing their hand into booking what many respected voices in the sport consider a dangerously premature comeback that prioritizes entertainment over fighter safety. The emotional weight and pressure of performing in front of his Brazilian home crowd clearly outweighed any medical concerns or professional advice about taking more recovery time. Oliveira repeatedly emphasized how magical it would be to fight in Brazil again, but completely glossed over the fact that his brain might not have fully recovered from the trauma it experienced just 8 weeks ago. The romanticized notion of fighting for his people seems to have completely clouded his judgment about what's actually best for his long-term career and personal well-being. Meanwhile, the ongoing drama between Brendan Schaub and Renato Moicano has somehow reached soap opera levels of pettiness and personal attacks that's more entertaining than either of their actual fighting careers ever were. This whole mess started when Schaub publicly criticized Moicano for refusing to take the UFC antitrust lawsuit settlement money, which seemed like a reasonable business disagreement between two adults, until you realize how deeply personal and vindictive it's become on both sides. Schaub accused Moicano of using ChatGPT artificial intelligence to come up with creative insults for their social media beef, which is probably the most 2024 way possible to end a public feud between two grown men. The layers of irony and contradiction in this situation are absolutely incredible when you break them down. Moicano not taking the settlement money actually benefits Schaub financially by increasing his own payout, yet he's still going after him publicly like they're fighting over the last piece of pizza at a party.
Then there's the additional irony that Moicano had to appear on someone else's podcast just to respond to Schaub's criticism, which Schaub immediately used as ammunition to claim victory in their verbal war by pointing out that Moicano needed another platform to reach him. It's like watching two people argue about who's more irrelevant while simultaneously proving that they're both desperate for attention and validation from an audience that's moved on to more interesting drama. But perhaps the most shocking and disrespectful prediction in recent memory came from Henry Cejudo.
who flat out declared that Alexander Volkanovski's days as featherweight champion are completely numbered and that his reign is essentially over. Cejudo boldly stated that either Aaron Pico or Lone Murphy will become the next featherweight champion after their upcoming fight, completely writing off one of the most dominant and technically skilled champions in recent UFC history, like he's some washed-up veteran hanging on too long.
This isn't just a bold prediction. It's borderline disrespectful to a fighter who's successfully defended his title multiple times against elite competition and only recently lost it to another exceptional athlete. Cejudo specifically mentioned that these younger fighters are in their absolute prime, while questioning whether Volkanovski still possesses the physical tools and mental sharpness necessary to compete at the highest level of mixed martial arts. Coming from a former two-division champion who understands what it takes to reach the top, this carries serious weight and credibility in the MMA community.
The timing of this prediction makes it even more interesting and potentially prophetic, considering Volkanovski is still recovering, both physically and mentally, from his devastating knockout loss to Topuria. Cejudo seems to believe that loss revealed fundamental weaknesses that these hungry young fighters will be able to exploit, essentially arguing that Father Time has finally caught up with someone who seemed invincible just a year ago.
All of these seemingly separate storylines and controversies converge into one massive question about the current state of mixed martial arts politics, fighter psychology, and business decisions. Chael Sonnen recently stated that if du Plessis manages to defeat Chimaev in a convincing and dominant fashion, he'll immediately leap into the top 3 pound-for-pound rankings alongside Islam Makhachev and Ilia Topuria, fundamentally changing how we view the middleweight division hierarchy. That kind of dramatic ranking leap would completely validate du Plessis as more than just a placeholder champion who happened to be in the right place at the right time. A dominant victory over Chimaev would prove that he's a legitimate force who can handle the absolute best competition the sport has to offer, while simultaneously raising serious questions about whether Chimaev's hype train was justified or if he's been carefully protected from truly elite competition for too long.
The implications extend far beyond just rankings and mathematical calculations, though. These controversies reflect the current state of fighter psychology, business pressures, and the social media-driven nature of modern MMA promotion. You have paranoid preparation methods that border on mental illness, coaches making seemingly impossible promises to generate headlines, fighters rushing back from serious injuries to capitalize on emotional moments, and former champions being written off by legends who should know better.
The sport has never been more unpredictable, more politically charged, or more influenced by factors outside of pure fighting ability. Social media followings now matter as much as win-loss records, personality conflicts drive matchmaking decisions, and fighters are making career-altering choices based on emotions rather than logic. That unpredictability and chaos is exactly what makes it impossible to look away from the beautiful disaster that modern mixed martial arts has become, and why these upcoming fights will determine not just champions, but the entire direction of multiple divisions for years to come.